Thanks for tuning in today. I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist. Join me as I seek out the small incremental changes being applied in other industries that we can learn from and that can be applied in healthcare. Can these changes bring immediate value, but also add up to the big improvements and revolution we need in healthcare? Come along with me to explore the possibilities. My innovative guests from around the globe have used small incremental improvements to achieve their moonshot. And today I'm talking to Dr. Khan Siddiqui. He's a radiologist, a serial entrepreneur, founder and chief technology officer and chief medical officer for Higi. Khan, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me, Nick. Great to be here.
So it's always exciting to talk to you. You've got such a long and storied background, not just as a physician, but also as a technologist. I think I share a sort of common bond with some of the technology background. Tell us a little bit about your journey as to how you got here in terms of the activities that you were involved in early on and then through medical school and beyond.
Sure. So I guess I'll go back all the way to middle school where I got exposed to a PDB-11 and wrote my first uh, game. It was a hangman on a PDB-11 in middle school. So I guess I got exposed to technology long ago in the 80s and then early 80s and then beyond. I was, I'm self-taught software engineer, if you want to think of it that way. I've been doing software development for a very long time. Sold my first software out of high school, but I've always been passionate about medicine. That's what I wanted to do. Wanted to be a physician, so decided to go to med school. And being one of the medical students in the 90s who knew how to code gives you a certain privilege that most medical students don't get. So in med school, was working on various data projects and various development projects, including data mining, mainframe EMR. It was a Meditech system running in a proprietary language called Magic, and you had to code all in that and plus run punch cards to be able to get all the data back. So again, doing predictive modeling around financial outcomes as well as disease, prediction type of stuff in the early 90s. I then trained at NYU, build the internal medicine department's website at NYU, and supplement my intern salary, he was teaching Microsoft Office applications to the hospital staff. So,
and you've got the scars to prove it, I bet.
Exactly. So, and moved to Geisinger, where was part of the transition from the department's transition from film to filmless. So this was early days. We ended up one of the early sites for Stentor packs, which is now Philips eyesight. Got to meet Paul Chang and the team at UPMC. Part of that. I was really passionate about cardiac imaging, especially pediatric cardiac imaging, and was doing a lot of research in that aspect of it, including fetal cardiac imaging. And it was my wife who kind of pushed me towards informatics. She would say that you do all this research and publish and present, and nothing really happens out of it. But you go for this 10-minute committee meeting on IT, and the whole institution sings your song. So why are you resisting thinking about that? So I decided to think about it, and not having formal training in computer science, I thought maybe I need some training. So I started applying and looking around for informatics program, which, to be honest, didn't really exist formally. There were some informal things being done at Mayo Clinic and a few other places, and when I called, none of them really had any position. So and then, as fate have it, I one day called Elliot Siegel, who was the vice chair of informatics at University of Maryland and chief of imaging at Baltimore VA. And he had the first filmless department in the United States, and that opened in 1992. So would have been great to train with him. So my call with him went like, I was a 30 resident, so he had no idea who I was, and why I was calling. It's like, hey, I wanted to know if you had informatics fellowship, and his answer was no. Then I asked him if he was thinking of starting one. His answer was again no. And then I said, "What can you do? What can I do to convince you to start one?" And then the next thing you know, I was running that program. We started the program and ran it and trained a lot of folks in imaging informatics. Actually, led to a lot of tech transfer that happened through all the software development that we did in that program. A bunch of different startups came out of that program. Did another startup around semantic indexing of content that got acquired. Then got recruited by Hopkins to be director for biomedical imaging and informatics. And then from there, got recruited by Microsoft to come and run the medical imaging team in their health solutions group in Microsoft. So I've had a long, convoluted career.
And the Microsoft imaging, although at the time there wasn't a lot of this information public, but
medicine, radio.
You had actually created some really different approaches to that transfer of technology in a company that was really a technology company, and here you were in the healthcare space, but it went not the wrong way, but it went an unusual direction, right?
Yeah, so I started working on deep learning and machine learning very early. So I think my first paper on deep neural networks was published in February 2005, so way ahead of what the current craze is going on. So when I got to Microsoft, I really wanted to kickstart that effort on deep learning and machine learning at Microsoft in 2008. At the same time, there was another team at Microsoft trying to recognize human anatomy on videos. So we were trying to recognize human anatomy using machine learning on CT scans, MRs, ultrasound, things like that. And then that project used to be called Project Natal and ended up being Xbox Kinect. So Microsoft already was doing a lot of work in, especially Microsoft Research, in object recognition, and we kind of pushed that boundary to think about anatomy recognition, and that what kind of led to collaboration around those projects. So a lot of stuff that we did in medical imaging, because we needed high accuracy, not only that performance, but high accuracy, versus in the Xbox side of things, they needed higher performance and they had tolerance for accuracy. So both the teams have helped each other in achieving success of the whole machine learning work that we did.
And what was it about the connection? How did that come about? Did you just become aware of the work that they were doing, or was it sort of a natural tendency of these folks to sort of share that research?
I think the common theme was the Microsoft research team. So Jamie Shedden, who was working with us, and Antonio Cremonesi in our team would go and talk about what they're doing and their projects in different Microsoft research talks. And somebody in the Xbox team had seen Jamie's work on what he was doing in object recognition and human anatomy recognitions, and sent him an email like, can we talk? And he actually is a funny, his story is that, he said, sure, I have time sometime. This was Thursday at 8 p.m. in Cambridge, UK. He gets an email and he says, sure, let's talk next Tuesday or next Thursday, something like that. And he immediately gets the email back, how about now? So, and then that was it. And
so do you think it's something about the adjacency and the fact that they were sharing that knowledge internally that sort of helped with that?
I think so. I think a lot of big companies have a lot of silos, and you never know how the connection happens, right? So we had this team that is trying to solve a problem and looking around in the company at Microsoft Research and other places, who else is trying to address these issues, and found our work, and that's how it made it happen. I mean, same thing when I was trying to work on bringing up more robust compression technologies to medical imaging. Saw some work that people were doing in HD photo, and then brought that into as JPEG XR and did some work in compression. And so there's a lot of cross pollination of work that happened between different entities. Similarly, we did a lot of work on remote blob storage, which ended up being part of SQL, and then eventually Azure. So there was a lot of work that was happening back and forth, and knowledge share that was happening between teams.
And you then moved on to Health Vault, which of the two sort of big players in the personal health storage, that was the only one that continues to exist, right?
Yeah. So my last year at Microsoft, I was asked to help with Health Vault and figure out how do we get consumers more engaged and what the strategy needs to be for the stuff. And that was the first time I got really good exposure to it and really understood the consumer side of things. And plus working with the Xbox team on some of their work, and saw how it actually should be, how consumer engagement needs to be from a gaming point of view, and then thought of how do we bring that into healthcare. That was kind of So we did a lot of experiments in HealthWall to see what can we do to engage consumers. But then, I decided to go do this on my own with Higi. The Higi story started was in 2011. I was talking to folks about using social influence and behavioral economics to engage consumers and get them to uh, be active more in healthcare. And plus, I was seeing this tsunami of data need that was coming in with value-based care. As you know, outcomes in healthcare are more dependent on what patient does in their daily life. So practice of medicine contributes 20% of the outcomes, genetics contributes another 20% of the outcomes, and rest is all social determinants and behavioral factors that patient does. So as a physician, if I'm taking risk on a patient, and I don't have control over 60% of the outcome, that is bad. So how do we understand that data and how do we bring that into clinical workflows? That was kind of the idea behind Higi when we're starting, bringing that ambient data into clinical workflows and then engaging with consumers and getting them more engaged in healthcare.
So Higi's, I mean, you have this astounding collection of data. I've seen some of your presentations, some of your talks. Stepped inside. In fact, I've stepped into a Higi booth on a couple of occasions that I'll admit to anyway. Tell us a little bit about that and what that's influencing and how that's sort of impacting healthcare in a new and unique way.
Sure. So I think I believe in Iggy that so the journey for the patient, from doctor all the way to wearables and mobile devices, needs to happen. But there's a transition point, right? It's a big jump from, how we used to practice when the only time you interact with healthcare is with the doctor to I'm wearing things that are helping me with my healthcare, right? So we see Higi as the transition and continuum in between those two ends and help enable that connection happening, right? So when we start looking at collecting this data for patient outcomes, initially we did think of connecting to all the wearables. And we realized that if you look at the cost of healthcare was most in obesity, hypertension, diabetes. And if you looked at demographics, cost was higher for people who are age 65 and above, or people who make $40,000 or less in household income. And at that time in 2012, and even now, wearables just are not at that stage for it to be for them to be highly used by those populations. So what is that interim solution? That's how we kind of initially thought of it. But since then, we think it has a key solution behind it. So we decided to build a kiosk that has biometric measurements that are objective, direct measured, not human entered, and as a validated class 2 medical device, and decided to approach. We take another bet. We bet that the retail healthcare is going to become more and more front door of healthcare. I mean, this is 2012. Everybody's telling us brick and mortar are going away. Amazon's taking over everybody. Wearable is the thing. So we were going against that bet at that time. And as you can see now, with all the vertical integration and acquisition that are happening, retail is becoming the front door of healthcare. So we started deploying our kiosk through different retail partners nationwide. And today we are in more than 11,000 locations in the US, another 1,500 or so in non-retail locations such as hospitals, employers, community centers, churches, things like that. We screen about 1 million patients a week on the platform. We have about 50 million total unique individuals on the platform. We've done over 272 million screenings to date on the platform. So the platform connects to all wearables, all the major wearables, home monitoring devices, and then beyond that, we build population health applications and solutions. We launched our Salesforce Health Cloud patient monitoring solution last year. Then we launched our McKesson's pharmacy system integration application earlier this year that is live at Wegmans, where pharmacists actually can see the data coming in and help patients manage their hypertension. We recently launched our Epic App Orchard through Epic in partnership with Rush Health System, and it's live at Rush, where physicians can actually prescribe Higi and then the whole workflow starts, not only from the physician point of view, but also for the patient, integration into the MyChart, alerts and reminders to get the blood pressure done, and then data going back into registries as well as flow sheets into Epic. So it's a deep integrated app that is built on Epic, and we are working on others and providing those solutions to payers and physicians and large employers.
So for those of you just joining, I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist, and today I'm joined by Dr. Khan Siddiqui. We were just talking about the Higi experience and essentially a solution that's addressing that 60% or more of home-based activities that we really struggle with that demographic, as most people reference, the SDOH of healthcare. And you guys are really focusing on that and doing so successfully based on some of the data that I've seen.
Absolutely. I mean, our whole thing is about social determinants of health. I mean, one of our solutions that we're launching in the next 2 weeks, I think, next 2 weeks is designed to collect, enable connection to the patient and collect social determinants of health data about individual that we can then provide into the clinical workflows, payer workflows to better understand what the population issues are.
So one of the things that I've heard repeatedly from you, and the reason that I'm excited to talk to you about some of this on this show is that I think you very much buy into this incremental approach to improvements. And one of the things I've heard from you is some of the reasons and experiences that you've had. Can you share a little bit about your sort of view of those incremental steps and why that makes the difference?
Yeah, I fundamentally believe ideas evolve over decades, not just people talk about eureka moments, but eureka really is an output of decades long of something in your brain, brewing for a long time. And ideas evolve based on not just your individual repetitive intuition and work, but also networks. Who do you connect with? What information they provide you, and all these ideas from different people and your own work come together to eventually happen. So I think one of my famous things that I talk about is how GPS has influenced me, right? So GPS, we know, started when two researchers at JPL decided when Sputnik was launched by Russia, they wanted to figure out can they listen to the beeping signal that was coming out of Sputnik, and as part of that, they started to document every single time they heard the beeps, and they realized there was a frequency change that was happening. And based on that, they thought this may be the Doppler effect, and they actually mapped out the exact orbit of Sputnik just by listening to the frequency, the sound that was coming out, or signal that was coming out of Sputnik, and mapping it out. So their boss called them up and asked them, like, hey, you guys figured out the location of an object in the sky from a known stationary location on the land. What if the problem was reversed? What if we knew the location of the object in the sky and had to find something on the land? Can you figure that out? And that became the big genesis of GPS. And they never thought you will be looking for your coffee, cup of coffee on your using GPS, or your parking spot using GPS, or nearest hotel using GPS. I mean, they weren't even imagining those scenarios. So when I was started working on deep learning and identifying human anatomy, my whole thing was that today the way we look at data in EMRs is as if I gave you the traffic data on Excel spreadsheet, block by block, minute by minute, and ask you to map your route home. You would never be able to do it. You just cannot comprehend all the relations between the data that is happening. I think as subspecialists, we kind of do that in our brain, but it still requires a lot of cognitive power to really understand all the aspects in patient's healthcare data overload that is happening and how they tie to each other and influence each other. So we learn over time, but I think if the vision was that if we can represent the data on some kind of image-based format, people will come up in the future, come up with ways to show this data and help people understand it better. So the first step to do that is to be able to identify anatomy on imaging, medical imaging, right? So that's what we started working on, really building the GPS of the human body. And the problem was magnitudely much more complex. There's one Earth, so you're building one GPS. There's 7 billion plus humans, so you have to build something that actually works across everybody. And so it kind of has it is this whole idea of geolocating information on some kind of imagery really started with that Sputnik launch, and now we're it's being used in Kinect to recognize poses. We're doing it with all this AI deep learning thing that is happening. Is really the concept of representing data on imaging, understanding what is inside imaging is what it is.
Yeah, I personally love that story so much because it was the combination of all of these things coming together, but in an unexpected way. And that's really one of the major premises I have, is mixing people up and not putting boundaries. If you try and sort of force things in, I think that's what we did with the EHR in the early days. Is, well, that's how we did it. Let's repeat that. Using punch cards in the old days. And so I think that's great. So we're heading close to the end of time, and I want to be sure that we pick your brain, because it feels like you've got this preeminent sort of technique for pulling out the future. As you think about where we are today and where we could go, and I understand that there's lots of steps in between, but where do you see this all going, particularly from a healthcare standpoint for physicians, but also for patients?
I think I'm really excited of where healthcare is going, both from a physician point of view and patient's point of view. A lot of people are, hear the term artificial intelligence and get scared about it. That happens every time we have new technologies coming out there. People who have fear about the stuff. So like one of my mentors would say, if I think about artificial intelligence, there will be no radiologists, and I don't think that way. I think there will be radiologists who use artificial intelligence, but the radiologists who don't use probably won't exist, right? So I do see a lot of promise in AI, not general purpose AI, but more on specialized AI for particular use cases. I think the focus really is, or the burden is really on us to figure out what are the right problems to be solved, so that we can drive that development in the direction that actually helps us take care of patients. At the end of the day, patients are what we need to care about, right? How do we improve outcome? How do we improve healthcare? Where are the inefficiencies in the system that we have today, and how do we use these new technologies to really get to that? And I think this empowerment of patient and consumer is going to increase more and more as it becomes a social norm, or what I call normative influence, that patient actually care about their health. You will see that transition happening, and it's very hard to predict what actually disrupts technology, right? So my best example is, everybody keeps, when I talk about radiology and AI, the AI is going to steal my job, and it's like, well, there's something else already stealing your job that you probably don't even know about. So I asked, how many people in the room know what a ultrasound for trisomy screening is? I was like, everybody raised their hand. Yeah, we look for things in high-risk patients for Down syndrome all the time. So it's like, is it a bread butter, study that you do? It's like, yeah, absolutely, every single day. It's like, tell me when was the last time you did one, and then you see complete silence in the room because they don't remember when the last time they did it. And I tell them the last time you did it was 2016, because there's a blood test came out that detected cell-free DNA in 2013, and in 3 years, a whole imaging modality disappeared.
Right.
And nobody even knew it happened because there's so much volume of stuff to do. You didn't even realize a study disappeared. So it's like you would not be able to predict what will come and disrupt. It'll just come and happen. So I'm really excited about it. I think there's a lot of cool stuff is happening. Accuracy on diagnoses, accuracy on treatment, improved outcomes are all going to happen through a lot of the technology innovation that are happening. I mean, this is a technology boom that is happening right now. Even if you look at genomic sequencing, right? I mean, it's breaking all Moore's law, and how the cost has gone down, and how acceleration of with informatics and genomics combined is really changing changing discovery of different things. So
Yeah,
anyway.
so I would agree. I mean, and that particular story about the genomics, I think, is so on point. You know, what's interesting about that was it was one of the shortest periods of time from start to finish of the innovation, the understanding, and the approval by the colleges as well.
Absolutely.
To say, oh yeah, no, we'll do this. And I'm thinking that the radiologists weren't involved in that because they didn't need to be, right?
Yep. So anyway.
Yeah. Well, listen, it's been fantastic as always. I always learn a tremendous amount. I know my viewers are. I just want to say thank you very much for joining me today,
Thank you, Nick.
Khan. It's been a pleasure.
Pleasure's all mine.
Thanks for joining me today. Do you have any better ideas, or have you found a small incremental change that's brought about a big improvement in your world? Let's continue the conversation on our hashtag, The Incrementalist, or share with me at Dr. Nick1 on Twitter. You can find more information about the show on our program page at healthcarenowradio.com. And tune in next time to hear my discussions with leaders and innovators from around the globe who've revolutionized their space by using small incremental improvements to achieve their moonshot. I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist, and I'm starting a revolution through evolution.